The man sat in his living room on a quiet afternoon, the hum of the ceiling fan mixing with the faint sound of his son tapping on the keyboard in the next room. Everything was peaceful, the kind of silence that comes only after a long week of work. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his tea, when suddenly a loud banging shook the walls. It was coming from next door. At first he thought someone had dropped something heavy, maybe furniture or a tool. But then he heard it. A woman's voice shrieking, sharp and furious. "What is wrong with this damn Wi-Fi? I swear someone is messing with me." The man frowned, setting his cup down. That voice was unmistakable. It belonged to his neighbor, a woman who had lived beside him for years but never once greeted him kindly. She was known for her arrogance, for shouting at delivery drivers, for complaining about the smallest things, for believing every inconvenience in her life was caused by others. He sighed, hoping she would quiet down soon, but the banging grew louder. It was on the wall they shared, like she was striking it with her fist. Then, before he could stand, there came heavy footsteps on his porch. The screen door rattled as she slammed it open without knocking. She stood there, her face red with anger, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. "What did you do to my internet?" she demanded. The man blinked, confused. "Excuse me." She jabbed a finger toward him. "Don't play dumb. My Wi-Fi went down, and it happened the exact moment your lights flickered. I know you did something. You think you're smart, trying to cut me off." Her voice carried across the street, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. The man felt heat rising in his chest. "I haven't touched your Wi-Fi," he said firmly. "Mine is working fine." But she only laughed bitterly. "Of course yours is fine. Because you're stealing mine. You must have switched something, rerouted something. Don't lie to me." The accusation stunned him. Stealing her Wi-Fi? It was absurd. He had his own service, his own bill to prove it. But arguing with her felt like shouting into a storm. She thrived on drama. He noticed neighbors peeking through blinds, watching. She didn't care. She raised her voice even more. "I'll call the service company. I'll call the police if I have to. You think you can outsmart me, but I'll prove you're behind this." The man kept his tone calm, though anger boiled beneath. "Listen carefully," he said. "I don't need your Wi-Fi. I pay for my own. Maybe you should check with your provider." For a moment her eyes darted, uncertain, but pride forced her to keep shouting. "Don't try to lecture me. I know people like you. Always sneaky, always pretending to be innocent. Well, I'm not stupid." With that she turned sharply, stomping down the porch steps, muttering curses under her breath as she went back to her house. The man stood in the doorway, watching her slam her own door so hard the frame rattled. He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. It wasn't the first time she had caused a scene, but this was different. She had accused him of something ridiculous, loud enough for the whole block to hear. He closed the door and locked it, shaking his head. From the hallway his son appeared, curiosity in his eyes. "Dad, what happened? Why was she yelling again?" The man sighed. "She thinks we're messing with her internet." The boy raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "That doesn't even make sense." He glanced toward the router sitting on the shelf, the small lights blinking steadily. "Our network's fine. If hers isn't working, that's her problem." The man nodded, but a strange thought lingered. Why had she been so quick to accuse him? Why scream about Wi-Fi like it was life or death? Something about her fury didn't feel right. He sat back down, but his tea had gone cold, forgotten. Outside, he could still hear her muffled voice through the wall, ranting into her phone. He wondered how long this would go on. He didn't know yet that this outburst was only the beginning, that his son's curiosity and his neighbor's arrogance would collide in a way that would change everything, turning this small fight over Wi-Fi into something much bigger, something she would regret for the rest of her life. The man tried to shake off the neighbor's shouting, but his son was not ready to let it go. The boy's sharp mind was already turning the pieces around like a puzzle. He went back to the living room, sat down in front of the router, and pulled out his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys as lines of data filled the screen. He frowned and called his father over. "Dad, look at this," he said, pointing to the logs. The man leaned closer, not fully understanding the technical details, but he could see numbers, strange IP addresses, and connections that didn't look familiar. "What does it mean?" he asked. The boy adjusted his glasses and smiled faintly. "It means someone has been connected to our Wi-Fi who shouldn't be. And judging by the device names, it's not just one thing, it's a whole set: her phone, her laptop, even her smart TV. She's been using our network for weeks, maybe months." The man's eyes widened, his chest tightening with anger. All this time, the arrogant neighbor had not only stolen his connection but had the nerve to accuse him of tampering with hers. It was almost laughable if it hadn't been so insulting. "Are you sure?" he asked. The boy clicked a few more keys, opening a record of bandwidth usage. "Look here. Most of the spikes happen late at night, hours when we're sleeping. Someone was streaming, downloading, doing heavy stuff. And look at the MAC addresses. These belong to her devices, no doubt about it. She's been piggybacking on us the whole time." The man felt his fists clench, the insult now sharper than before. Every time he had noticed the internet slowing down, every unexplained spike in the bill, it had been her, sitting smug in her house while draining what he paid for. He remembered the way she had stormed onto his porch, screaming accusations, making him look guilty in front of the neighbors, and the anger burned hotter. His son leaned back, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "She thinks she's clever, but she didn't expect me to be smarter. We can stop her whenever we want, Dad. But maybe just cutting her off isn't enough." The man tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" The boy grinned. "If we just block her, she'll know we caught her and she'll get quiet. But if we play it right, we can make her life miserable without her even realizing what's happening. We can turn her theft against her." The man studied his son for a moment, both proud and cautious. "You're saying you want to teach her a lesson?" The boy's grin widened. "Exactly. She wanted drama, so we'll give her something better. She wanted to scream about Wi-Fi going down? Let's make sure she screams for real." He began typing again, setting up a hidden guest network that looked like the real one but was filled with tricks. Redirects that sent users to random pages, pop-ups with cryptic messages. Even a looping connection that would crash her devices if she pushed too hard. The man watched, half amazed and half amused at how calm and focused his son was, every keystroke laying a trap. "She won't even know what's happening," the boy said. "She'll think her Wi-Fi is haunted, broken, or cursed. And if she tries to accuse us again, we'll have the logs ready to show the truth." The man felt a strange sense of satisfaction rising, a slow smile tugging at his lips. For years he had endured her arrogance, her yelling at neighbors, her false complaints to the HOA, and now the tables were turning. She thought she had power because she could scream the loudest, but she was about to learn that silence and skill could strike harder than any outburst. That night, they waited. At exactly 11 p.m., the spikes appeared again on the monitor, her devices connecting greedily. The trap was sprung, the fake network feeding her false access. Within minutes, a scream erupted from her house, louder than before, filled with frustration and rage. "Why is nothing working?" she shouted, her voice echoing across the quiet street. The man and his son exchanged a glance, silent laughter in their eyes. This was only the beginning. The next morning the man woke with a strange calm, the kind that comes after a small victory, and he watched the street from his kitchen window as if the world had become a stage for what would come next. His son already at the table with the laptop open, eyes bright with plans. They had caught her stealing their connection and had made her taste a little confusion the night before, but now they wanted something firmer, something that would show the truth without a single shout, so they set about gathering proof that could not be denied. The boy explained simply that logs and screenshots were good, but video and time-stamped records were better, and with that they prepared carefully. First they copied every relevant router log, saving dates and times, device names and MAC addresses in files named plainly and neatly so nothing could be lost. Then they set up an automated monitor to record any connection from the neighbor's devices and to email those records. To a secure account the boy had created, he taught his father how to export the data, how to format it as clean PDF reports that anyone could read, and he printed copies for safekeeping. While the technical work hummed on the table, the man thought about how often he had stood quiet as she shouted and how many times neighbors had leaned toward her voice instead of toward fairness. Each memory steeled his resolve to be precise and fair. He wanted the truth to win, not rumors, and he wanted the proof to be neat enough that even the loudest liar could not twist it. Over the next 2 days they collected everything. Network logs showing nightly spikes, timestamps that matched the hours when her streaming began, device IDs that matched the owner information they found through simple checks on the devices she used. And the boys set a small camera on the edge of their porch where it would not be obvious but would catch anyone who came close to the router. When the camera recorded the neighbor approaching the side of the house late at night, flashlight in hand and moving with the same hurried confidence he had seen before, the man felt a cold satisfaction but kept his face calm. He did not gloat because he knew gloating would only give her room to play victim and muddy the water. Instead he backed up every single piece of evidence in at least 3 safe locations: on a thumb drive hidden in his sock drawer, on a cloud account under a fake name, and on a printed stack that he placed in a folder on his shelf, each copy labeled with dates so nothing could be lost or claimed as altered. While gathering technical proof, he also prepared a short, plain statement that would explain what they had found in words any neighbor could understand, stripping out jargon and keeping facts simple. Device A connected at X time, used Y bandwidth, corresponded to the neighbor's tablet. Video shows her at X 12 plugging or attempting to plug into the side outlet. These statements were written calmly and without anger because he wanted to be seen as reasonable rather than vengeful. The boy helped too, making sure the timestamps were synchronized between the router logs and the camera footage so there would be no gap where she could claim coincidence. And when the files were ready, they tested playback on different machines to ensure every neighbor could view them if asked. As they worked, the man felt something like relief grow inside him, not because he wanted to hurt her more than she had already hurt his family, but because evidence would restore order. He had learned the hard way that shouting rarely brought justice but documents often did. He remembered how the company had burned him with false papers and how no one had listened, and he vowed the same would not happen again. Next he planned the moment of exposure with the same care he had given to collecting facts. It would not be a public ambush but a calm reveal, a presentation of truth at a place where rules and neighborly bonds mattered most. He imagined the community hall where people met, the very room where she loved to stand and hold her clipboard like a crown, and he decided that would be the stage where facts would be shown and laughter would be silenced by reality. Meanwhile, he also prepared a private record to give to any authority if legal action became necessary. Copies for the ISP, the HOA board, and the local Consumer Protection Agency, so that when the moment came no official could claim they had no evidence to act on. During these days the man walked his old streets with a new patience, greeting neighbors politely and listening without reaction as some of the same faces that had laughed before now showed small signs of curiosity or unease. Some even approached him with questions in hushed tones, asking if there was any truth to the rumors that had been flying around since the neighbor's angry outburst. The man answered simply that he had noticed irregular activity and was checking into it, never mentioning plans or threats, because stealth had become his tool and clarity his goal. In the evenings he and his son reviewed files together, his son pointing out technical details and the man noting how best to explain those details to people who didn't know networking. He practiced phrases that would cut through denial. Here is the time, he would say, here is the device, here is the video. Decide with these facts. With everything prepared, they also thought about consequences. He did not want to ruin a life for the sake of pride alone, and he set a boundary for himself. The evidence would be shown, questions asked, and the community would decide the result through its own rules. He wanted fairness, not bitterness. The boy, eager and proud, set up one last test. A harmless but clear capture that would show the neighbor's devices attempting to connect and failing when the network was tightened. A final small trap to prove that her access had been unauthorized. And when that test ran at midnight, the logs filled predictably, the devices pinged, tried to authenticate, and then stopped, leaving a neat trail of attempts that any rational person could read. Standing beside his son as they watched the clear chart of activity, the man felt the old pain stir but also a steady power. He thought of his children and how he would explain this in simple terms. We fixed what she stole. We showed the truth. And for the first time since the laughter had begun, his voice could hold calm promise instead of the raw ache of shame. The plan ready, the proof aligned, the man closed the folder and slid it into his jacket, feeling the weight of the papers as a promise rather than a burden. He knew the coming days would test him, that some would try to deny or to twist what they had, but he had learned how to prepare for that too. Copies, witnesses, synchronized records, plain language, and a patience that refused to be baited into mistakes. With his son's steady help, he was no longer the shock figure from the meeting months ago but a quiet force of truth. And as night fell, he walked to his window, looking across at the neighbor's house where blinds were drawn and lights were low, and he felt the strange clarity that comes when a plan is well made. The theft had been hidden in plain sight, but it had been simple to prove, and soon the neighborhood would watch truth replace laughter. That night the man and his son sat together at the kitchen table, the laptop open and the router logs scrolling slowly across the screen, every number and timestamp telling a story of arrogance and theft. And the boy's sharp eyes caught each one while the father thought about how to use them. They had gathered the evidence. But now came the part where they turned theft into humiliation, not with anger but with precision. The son explained quietly that instead of only cutting her off, they could redirect her devices to something that would break her pride. A digital mirror that showed her exactly what she had done. And the man nodded slowly, agreeing that the strike had to be clever. It had to make her realize she wasn't untouchable. So they built the trap, a fake network identical to their own, a decoy with the same name and password, but instead of offering access to the internet it carried only one path, a looping page that displayed bold words every time she connected, "Stop stealing." The boy coded it with simple flair, adding sounds and flashing screens that made it impossible to ignore, and then he sat back with a grin, saying, "She wanted Wi-Fi. She'll get a surprise instead." The man felt a quiet satisfaction, because revenge done with silence and skill was sweeter than shouting in the street. Just after midnight, as the street grew dark and quiet, the logs lit up, her devices connecting eagerly. But this time instead of Netflix or social media she was met with the trap, and only seconds later came the scream, loud and shrill, piercing the silence of the night. "What is this?" Her voice rang out, windows lighting up as neighbors stirred. She shouted again, furious, slamming doors and stomping around, and the man and his son sat inside their house, calm, listening to her rage while the boy chuckled softly. But they weren't done yet. The next evening the boy set up another surprise, a fake message box that appeared on her phone whenever she tried to browse, telling her that her activity was being monitored and recorded, that stealing internet was a crime, the kind of message that felt official enough to strike fear. And when she read it, the man could hear her shout through the walls, panic rising in her voice as she called someone on the phone, insisting she was being hacked, insisting someone was watching her. The father and son exchanged a glance, their silence louder than her screams. Still, the man remained cautious, reminding his son that everything had to stay clean and legal, no real harm, only truth revealed in a way she couldn't ignore. They built logs and kept copies of every redirect, every message, so when the day came to reveal everything it would all line up neatly. Over the next days her frustration became the neighborhood's entertainment. Neighbors whispering as she shouted in the street, accusing invisible enemies, blaming everyone but herself, her pride unraveling in public view. And the man watched carefully, not rushing, because he knew the final blow would come not from tricks on a screen but from facts laid bare in the very room where she had once mocked him. For now, it was enough to hear her voice crack, to see her pride shake, to know that she was beginning to fear the very connection she had once stolen so easily. The trap had worked, the screams proved it, and the man's calm smile returned after many long months, because this was only the beginning of her downfall. The night for the big exposure arrived and the clubhouse was fuller than usual, people coming because they heard about the neighbors' fight and because Karen liked to speak at these meetings, so everyone assumed it would be another night of rules and lectures. But the man and his son walked in quietly, their faces calm, and took seats near the front where they could be seen but not make a scene. The lights hummed and conversations drifted until Karen rose with her clipboard and a practiced smile, ready to take her place as judge of the block. She began her speech about order and respect, her voice sharp and confident, and the room nodded along with her for a moment until the man stood up slowly and the air changed. All eyes turned because they remembered how he had been pushed out and how he had kept his head low since. He walked to the front without anger in his steps and simply said, "I have something the neighborhood needs to see." Then he nodded to his son, who connected the laptop to the projector. The big screen lit up with clean files and plain words. No shouting, no drama, just facts and timestamps. The first slide showed the router logs with dates and times marked clearly, and the man explained calmly that those spikes in the logs matched the hours when Karen's devices had been active. He pointed to the MAC address. and read the device names in simple words so everyone could follow. The son played the recorded video next and the room fell silent as Karen's own figure appeared on the screen crouching near their side outlet late at night. Flashlight in hand, caught by the porch camera. The clip showed her reaching, adjusting. The exact moment a connection started on the log. The match was clear and the proof was hard to argue with. Some heads turned white and some mouths opened. People whispered and leaned forward. The smugness that had lived on some faces disappeared fast. Karen's face went pale in real life too. She tried to speak but the man lifted a hand and said in a soft voice, "Let the evidence speak." Then he distributed printed copies of the logs and of bank records that showed where the fines she had collected went. The papers were neat, labeled, and easy to read. A neighbor who had once defended her looked down at the receipts and his face changed when he saw a line item that paid for a private dinner rather than pool repairs. The room buzzed with questions and the air filled with a strange electric shame. Karen slammed her clipboard once and shouted that the files were fake, that the man was cruel and that he had a grudge. But the man had already thought of that. He had copies sent to the ISP and to the Consumer Protection Office earlier that day, and the woman from the ISP stood up calmly and verified publicly that the logs matched their server records. She explained in simple terms how the MAC addresses and timestamps align and how the ISP would not release false data without cause. That confirmation made murmurs rise into exclamations and Karen's voice faltered. Some neighbors stood and asked direct questions about the fines they had paid and the projects that never happened. One by one the man showed the documents with dates and signatures that tied payments to accounts linked to people who had once laughed at him and now had no easy words. A woman who had mocked him at the meeting months ago had to explain why she had a late payment notice in her name when the man produced a copy. She stammered and sank back into her chair. The room turned from polite to furious as neighbors realized they had been lied to and used. Someone shouted for Karen to resign. Another demanded the board vote immediately, and the energy shifted into a tide that only went one way. Karen's supporters looked around for allies and found none. Because the papers the man had brought had made the web of protection transparent and thin. The man never raised his voice. He spoke slowly and clearly so anyone could hear and understand. He showed kindness by reading each fact plainly. And in doing so he broke the theater of her power. When Karen tried one last time to attack his character, the man's son stepped forward with a quiet confidence and played the recording of her shouting at his father on the night she accused him. The clip was small, but it revealed her temper and her habit of turning others into targets. People who had once joined her laughter now looked ashamed. Some even apologized softly because the truth woke them to how they had acted. A board member who had supported Karen rose and admitted he had not checked the records closely and that perhaps he had been wrong to trust her word alone. That admission opened the door for the vote. The crowd called for action and the board, now faced with plain evidence and the ISB's confirmation, had to act. They voted to suspend Karen pending a full audit. The sound of the gavel seemed thin compared to the noise this time. It was the sound of a fall, not a command. Karen's face crumpled as the room's mood changed from reverence to rejection. Neighbors who had once nodded in agreement at her statements now asked for refunds, for records, for accountability. And the man watched quietly as the consequence he had planned for months unfolded. He felt no joy in seeing her hurt, but he felt the deep satisfaction that comes when a wrong is righted and a truth cleans the air. When the meeting ended, people came up to him with mixed words. Some thanked him with tears. Others hugged his son for the courage he had shown. A few who had been silent before now offered their support and said they had been ashamed for how they had joined the laughter. The man accepted nothing loud, only a few soft thank yous, and a nod from an old neighbor who had once looked away, outside. The clubhouse the night felt different, lighter, the kind of silence that means a weight has been lifted. The man and his son walked home together slowly, not as victors gloating but as people who had done the hard work of showing truth. They had prepared the files, synchronized the logs with the footage, and kept their heads cool so that no one could call their actions petty or false. And in that calm method the man saw that the neighborhood had begun to change. Karen would need to face investigations and perhaps legal consequences, but the most important thing was the shift in people's hearts. Those who had laughed at another's pain now felt how cruel that laughter can be. And the man felt his own pain soften because it had become a lesson for many. As they reached his porch, his son squeezed his hand and whispered, "We did it." And the man looked back at the lights of the clubhouse where people were still arguing and planning new rules that would prevent such abuse. He nodded quietly, knowing the work was not over but satisfied that the big exposure had been clean and true. The truth had been shown in a place they all trusted, and that fact meant the smiles that once mocked would not come back easily. The hall had fallen into chaos behind him, but the man did not need to stay any longer. He and his son walked slowly under the quiet night sky, the street lamps glowing above them. And for the first time in a long time he felt the air in his chest loosen as if the heavy stone that had sat there had finally been lifted. His son looked up at him with pride glowing in his young eyes. The boy had been the key, sharp and clever where arrogance thought it was safe, and together they had turned humiliation into victory. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like cracks through glass. The neighbor who had screamed so loudly about her Wi-Fi now barely stepped outside. Whispers followed her everywhere. People pointed and shook their heads. The same faces that once cheered her arrogance now turned away from her. No one trusted her, no one defended her. And when the board's audit uncovered the misuse of funds and the ISP filed its official complaint, her mask finally shattered. She tried calling meetings in her defense, but barely anyone came. Those who did only asked sharper questions, pressing her for answers she no longer had. Her screams that once filled the street now sounded desperate and hollow, and each time she raised her voice the neighbors remembered the calm way the man had shown the truth, facts that spoke louder than any scream. The man didn't rush to gloat, he lived quietly, his evenings spent at the table with his son. The boy still tinkering with new codes and laughing softly when he thought of how easily pride had fallen. The man let his son enjoy the small victory because he wanted him to remember that cleverness and patience were stronger than rage. Sometimes neighbors stopped him on the street to thank him. Some admitted they had once believed Karen's words. Some confessed they had laughed at his pain, and though their apologies came late, he nodded politely, not out of bitterness but because he understood that humiliation had blinded them too. The important part was that they finally saw the truth. Karen's downfall became a kind of legend whispered in the neighborhood, a story that spread beyond their street, about how arrogance had stolen Wi-Fi and thought itself untouchable until a quiet man and his clever son turned the theft into exposure. Some even told it like a warning to their children, that lies and theft eventually find their way to light. The man would sit on his porch some evenings, sipping his tea again, the same way he had on the day it all began, and he would listen to the quiet, no longer broken by banging or shouting, just the calm hum of the night. His son sometimes sat beside him with a grin, reminding him that they had done more than win a fight over internet. They had restored respect. They had proven that silence and truth strike harder than noise. And when he thought of Karen now, hiding in her house, stripped of her false power, he felt no hatred, only a steady sense of closure. She had screamed when the Wi-Fi stopped working. But the real scream had been the one she let out when her lies collapsed. And that was the sound that echoed longest in the neighborhood. A sound that reminded everyone that pride built on theft will always fall. The man closed his eyes one evening, the breeze cool against his face, and whispered to himself, "It is finished," knowing that his revenge was not in breaking her but in standing taller than her screams, in showing the truth until no one could laugh at his pain again.